Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Security Repo podcast. Today, we have a pretty exciting episode, one that I'm really keen to dive into because it's a topic that I honestly don't know too much about. But we're going to be looking at security. We're going to be touching a little bit on nuclear energy and nuclear stuff as well, which is going to be really exciting. That we have a fantastic guest with Andrew Elliot. Andrew is a senior manager at KPMG's cybersecurity team. He has over 12 years of experience in the federal government, primarily in nuclear security, cyber and physical. He's a threat analysis and has a lot of experience in IT/OT governance of security and other mission critical systems. So Andrew, thanks so much for taking the time. There's so much in that bio that I want to tap into, but we're just going to have to go on the journey. But welcome to the show, and we're pleased to have you here.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks a lot for having me.
Absolutely, great to see you again. So we're just going to jump straight to the one that everyone's like curious about. Like, all right, nuclear power, nuclear energy. What's your journey into that? Like, how do you get started in that field? Are you a physicist? What is this?
Yeah, so funnily enough, it kind of came by an honest chance at the end of high school. My background, I'm a nuclear engineer on paper. Like when I was in high school, I was a bit of a math geek, and I was totally convinced I was actually going to be going to school for math. So I was going through the university view books and basically, picked out my schools for math, and then I needed one more. So I started flipping through. I found University of Ontario Institute of Technology. It's called Ontario Tech University now, but it was actually a school my brother went to. So I said, oh, well, let's kind of have a look here. And I saw nuclear engineering, and I kind of said, oh, well, that sounds kind of cool. Check. And basically, that's how I started. I went to kind of like the open house and learned a little bit more about the program and just kind of fell in love with it. And really, like, the more I learned about it, the more I kind of realized what an untapped energy source we have. Unfortunately, it's been kind of highly scrutinized as a result of a few unfortunate events over the last 50 some odd years. Majority of which have been significantly kind of blown out of proportion, and or kind of had design flaws and old technology that just aren't used anymore. Never in Canada, mind you, very limited in the States as well. And I just love talking nuclear to people because I feel like there's just such a misconception out there that I'd love to kind of break down some barriers.
Yeah.
It not to let me make a joke out of it, but that it reminds me of the thing from The Simpsons. Like, yeah, Homer just showed up when the plant opened. That's kind of what it sounds like what you're describing.
Yeah.
No, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's interesting that it led you down that path. Like, there's so much more I want to dig into, but we have a lot of things to cover. So let's go ahead and move on. Mac, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much I want to kind of tap into as well, and I think before we get down to the security stuff, let's just stick a little bit to nuclear because there's a lot I think that we all want to know. But I totally agree with what you said. Nuclear energy used to be the kind of, it comes with surrounds of pollution. Like you think of, Dwayne mentioned The Simpsons, like acid rain and stuff like that. Like the nuclear, and it's just steam coming out, but all this smoke coming out of the systems. We totally got the wrong idea around that. I think it's interesting, but there is a resurgence coming back. I feel, or at least that's how I feel. Is it, as an expert or someone in the field, do you see that there is a resurgence too, or are we still kind of pushing it away from nuclear?
No, there's definitely a resurgence. So thankfully, we've gotten past, the latest kind of unfortunate event, Fukushima, back in 2014. But I think, with climate change and all that kind of stuff coming about, people are kind of finally realized, all the pro-nuclear people have been advocating this forever, but people have come to the conclusion that, if you want to talk about net zero emissions targets and stuff like that, there is no net zero without nuclear. It's outside of renewable energy. It is the only non-emitting energy source out there. And I made a bit of a cynical joke at the Atlantic Security Conference during my presentation that, if they regulated the automotive industry the way that they regulate the nuclear industry, there would be no cars on the road. We would still be in horse and carriage going around, because it really is that safe, and they really take all the lessons learned and everything to heart. And yeah, it's definitely making a resurgence, especially in Canada, actually, because of the you think about Northwest Territories, up Alaska way as well for the United States. A lot of these communities, they still rely on oil and gas. Sometimes they have to get stuff trucked up. And I'm sure you guys have heard of the show Ice Road Truckers and all that stuff, and how dangerous that is, and what a single point of failure that can be. So they're actually looking at these small modular reactors to not only provide electricity to the communities, but actually provide central heating as well. Because a nuclear plant operates the same way as coal. You're just boiling water, driving a steam turbine, and they call it, primary, secondary side, for lack of a better word, completely isolated. The nuclear stuff's completely contained. It's just a fancy way to boil water, basically.
Yeah. I live in Chicago, which is part of Illinois. Illinois, I believe, has the most of anywhere like in the world. Like 53% of our power in the state comes from nuclear, and
Yeah,
we're pretty safe here. So
yeah, it's awesome.
And it is one of those things too, when you actually look into all the renewables. So I'm a big climate activist. Well, okay, I'm not a big climate activist. I'm a very moderate climate activist. but when you actually start looking into it, things like wind power and other areas like that, these also have pretty negative effects when it kills hunting birds and predatory birds and endangered species in other areas. So I am glad that we're finally fighting this. One last question, then I promise I'm going to drop it, and then we'll dive into security related topics. But one of the things of why I've been questioning this. Why is nuclear energy more popular now? And obviously, you mentioned the nuclear disasters, and obviously that has an impact, especially with public opinion. But the other thing that someone mentioned is it takes 15 years for a nuclear power station to kind of be completed.
Yes.
And the longest of any kind of presidential terms in the USA are 4 years. There's just about everywhere in the world it's around about that, apart from if you're, I don't know, in Russia, then it's a very long time. But do you think that has an impact on it? The fact that, if you commission this, it's not going to be till your predecessors that are going to kind of benefit from it. Do you think that has an impact?
I think it does, for sure. I think, and this is just my own personal opinion, but I think that there's, been quite a few years of, a lot of politicians don't really want to take the leap of fully endorsing nuclear because of some of the people that are against it. Right? Everybody wants to maintain their voting base, right? And I think that they were a little bit timid to do that, but because the science is there now and that people are really serious about net zero, they realize that, there has to be a change. And another kind of, layer to that is just regulatory challenges as well, right? And I worked for the regulator for over 10 years. And it's one of those things where, you want to make sure you get it right, but sometimes regulatory framework has to change. The difference between kind of prescriptive and performance-based requirements, like all of that kind of stuff takes time. And the nice thing to know is that, I know Canada and the US have, I think they recently just signed an MOU to continue their cooperation on regulatory harmonization and stuff like that. So people are starting to do what they can to kind of get ahead of some of the more red tape type barriers that are out there. So hopefully we'll see things kind of move along a little bit better. And these small modular reactors, like a nuclear power plant, you're talking, sometimes upwards of 1,000 megawatts. They have these small modular or micro modular reactors that are down to like 5 megawatts. So it's very scalable. And, once these kind of start getting built and the proof of concepts and everything are there, I really hope that things can get streamlined.
All right, we could talk about this all day. Maybe we'll have you back on the show just to drill into all this stuff and talk in depth. But
yeah, I love it.
We want to talk about security, and not just nuclear security, but I actually start with like your role in nuclear security. Like, how did you go from working in the industry to now you're of KPMG. I think we can say that you're a KPMG, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So you're at KPMG now. How did that? What did that road look like? You're a security manager over there. How do you go from nuclear security to your day to day now? Maybe you could just give us a high level. What is your day to day now? What does a security manager like? What does that role do?
Yeah, so it's it's risk services, risk advisory consulting services. Variety of clients. One thing that I really love about the job is that no 2 days are the same. That's definitely one of the more exciting things. But yeah, just a variety of clients. I mean, being in Ottawa here, I mean, I obviously have lots of federal government work. But our region itself, because we're a regionally based kind of practice, we cover all of Ontario, with the exception of Toronto, just because of how big it is. It's its own region. And we cover all of Atlantic Canada as well. And that's where Dwayne and I actually met at the Atlantic Security Conference, which was great. So our official kind of service line that I'm in, it's strategy and governance. But really, we kind of do everything. So that's anywhere from, kind of leadership and board of director engagement. We develop cybersecurity strategies. We conduct cybersecurity maturity assessments. And then from that, we develop implementation plans, roadmaps to kind of help bring them up to a certain level that they want to be at. In addition to that, and kind of a nexus from the nuclear world, I did a lot of exercises in my life, and so we do a lot of cybersecurity tabletop exercises as well, and that's kind of at all levels. That's right up at the executive leadership level and right down to kind of the tactical level as well. And in addition to that, all the red teaming, penetration testing, all that kind of stuff. We got a really talented team here in Ottawa that kind of do everything, which is a lot of fun, and hence why no 2 days are really the same.
So when I think of tabletop exercises, the first one that always jumps to mind is Black Hill Security's Backdoors and Breaches, like the D&D themed card game. But it seems to be really geared toward like incident response of a specific nature. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what tabletop exercise are you running? Like what do you see success with out there? What's even popular with your clients?
Well, I think ransomware is just kind of the buzzword of the day over the last little bit. But really, like a lot of our exercises, and I'm sure you guys can attest to this as well. You see really quickly that it's not really about what kicked off the event. It kind of becomes a real kind of business issue, right? And it's not necessarily the technical cyber side. It's how is the organization going to survive this, and what are they actually going to do? Who are they going to coordinate with? All of that good stuff. So that's kind of really where our exercises kind of turn. Yeah, there's a little bit of a cyber initiating event, but of course we stay within the realm of reality and all that good stuff. But we don't necessarily focus on the feasibility of what actually happened. It's just saying, look, this happened. Now, what is the organization going to do, and who's in charge? And it's kind of just everybody understanding their roles and responsibilities, their legal obligations, all that kind of stuff. We always talk about like a fire drill too, right? And it's just about kind of, do you know where to go? Do you know who to contact? Do you know who your wardens are? All of that good stuff. So we do a lot of that. And, one thing I like to do too is throw in a lot of different, injects to kind of get people uncomfortable. Because I think we all know that, part one or rule one of having a plan is nothing goes to plan, because something always happens. So I always throw things in that, their incident commander that they think is going to come in and save the day. Well, guess what? They're coming back from the Atlantic Security Conference and they're on a plane. They're unreachable. Who's in charge now? And how is this person actually going to coordinate and do that job until the person becomes available again? So it's really just about kind of pushing the envelope and getting people to expect the unexpected, not just in a cyber sense, but just in all kind of aspects of business operations.
I love that. There's I think a lot of security consultancy gets a kind of a bad rap because there are people out there like, how do I help you fill in these boxes? And then you pay me and then I walk away and we
Yeah.
haven't solved anything, but you're compliant now at least. And it sounds like you were really challenging these teams to step up and like, hey, actually think through your real security. And
Yeah.
I see just a ton of value in that.
Absolutely, yeah. And funnily enough, I was chatting with somebody about this the other day. And it kind of just came up when we were doing some interviews for some new staff, and they asked me like what I like working, what I like the most about working at KPMG. And the one thing that I can actually say is, like you said, sometimes the consultant biz gets a little bit of a bad rap. There's TV shows like House of Lies out there and all that kind of stuff. Not sure if you've seen that, but it's one of my favorites. It's with Don Cheadle. But there's a real integrity piece at KPMG that I really like, and we're very honest to people as well, and say that like, hey, if you have this much budget that you're able to spend on cyber, and they come to us with ideas, we will be honest with them and say, you know what, if you're really going to if you really want to direct your efforts in a really good place, sure, you can do that if you really want, but we really think that you should kind of focus over here. So it's just a really good environment, and we really try and be honest and pragmatic with our clients, which is great.
Yeah. It's really interesting, like hearing you talk about this, because the approach is slightly different, I think, and when you were the analogies that you gave or the scenarios that you gave, the people thinking through. I wonder if some of that comes from your time, from working in such critical infrastructure like nuclear security, and if there's some other lessons that kind of having that past as really kind of that you use in your day to day. And I wonder if you could maybe
Yeah,
elaborate on what you kind of carry on from your previous kind of experience.
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, from a personal level, like integrity has kind of just always been a big part of, the fiber of my being. But that kind of came from working for the regulator as well. One of our biggest things is public trust, and right, because the public is trusting us. Or what? Sorry, I have to speak in past tense because I don't work for them anymore. But the public trusted us to make the right decisions from a regulatory perspective, because at the end of the day, the mandate has always been the protection of people, the environment, and respecting international obligations and all that kind of stuff. So trust is always a really important thing for me, and I definitely bring that over with my clients at KPMG. But just in terms of kind of like lessons to kind of carry over into the cybersecurity world from nuclear, I mean, and you guys know this too, like fear of the unknown can be crippling if you let it, right? And just like in cyber and the nuclear sector, like you have to be okay with accepting the fact that you're not going to know everything.
Mm.
And I always use kind of in the nuclear world, we always use the airplane analogy as well, right? Everybody knows how a plane works, but no one is an absolute expert on every single component of operation of an aircraft. There you have your subject matter experts. They focus on their own things, and it all comes together really nicely. It's the same thing in cyber. I mean, you can try, but if anybody's figured it out, please let me know. But I know that you just can't be an expert at everything. And it's kind of the same thing about, the complexity of systems, right? You know, Nuclear power systems, IT environments, arguably they're very similar in the sense that they can be very extraordinarily complex, and it's very easy to lose focus of not really what's important, but what is supporting what's really important. And Dwayne, to kind of go back to my presentation there at the Atlantic Security Conference about understanding your interdependencies. I mean, protecting the obvious is one thing, but really understanding everything that underpins those important assets and things like that is equally as important. Um, and just kind of a last bit as well is, never underestimate the power of people, right? Security culture, just genuinely good people that do a good job. Finding strength in people is always a recipe for success, no matter what industry you're in.
So you mentioned there back at Atlantic Security Con, um, you talked a lot about business impact of security, and this is something I have been hearing more and more about. Maybe just attuned to it after you said it, but hearing people talk about the role of security really is about availability these days.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be about defense and prevention, and now it is like how do we maintain the business? And so I was wondering if you could like share some thoughts on that. Like what do you see the goal of security really being inside the business?
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing I always like to cynically say as well is just like, not talking about cyber insurance here, by the way, but just saying that security is kind of like insurance in general, right? Like nobody really likes paying for it, but if something happens, you're definitely going to be glad you have it, right? And that's the same concept for security, especially in cyber, because you don't know what you can't see, and oftentimes in cyber you don't see anything. And just from the business angle, like no matter what industry you're in, understanding your business, what drives operation, and most of the time that's really what drives your profit. It's always going to put you ahead in the game so that you can start protecting yourself in a real pragmatic way. Right. So when we talked about tabletop exercises and stuff before about how a cyber event, it really becomes a business issue, right? Because when you think about executive leadership, they want the business to continue to operate. So that is why understanding the ins and outs of what makes your company operate, what makes it operate efficiently is so important so that you can leverage security practices to protect those functions properly. I mean, and the other kind of piece as well is just, again, speaking to it at my conference as well, is that when you're talking about understanding critical assets and all of that kind of stuff, I've seen so many times where it's just the cybersecurity folks that sit down and they try and figure it out. But it's not just a one team job. It's one of the biggest pitfalls to do that. And you have to take a team approach in finding resilience through collaboration. There's no other way to do it.
Mm. At the start of that, you mentioned something. You said you're not talking about cyber insurance, but you talked about kind of the relationship there. I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna let's go a little bit left field. I'm gonna ask you what is your opinion on cyber insurance? This isn't actually something we've covered a lot on the podcast, but it's kind of like it's out there. It's a thing. A lot of you kind of almost need it. What's your opinion on cyber insurance? Seeing as you brought it up.
Yeah. If I'm being completely honest, and this is just my own opinion, I'm not a big fan. Only because, and I understand kind of where it came from. I think when it became very popular, it was during COVID, and everybody was getting attacked, or
Mm.
compromised or whatever, and that was an option for people, and I think people found comfort in that, and there's definitely nothing wrong with it. But nowadays, when there's ransomware attacks, not even just ransomware, but everything going on every single day, I think a lot of the insurance companies now realize, ooh, we're actually going to have a lot of payouts here, and we're on the
Yeah.
hook for a lot of stuff, right? And now, um, the requirements that you have to meet, the boxes you have to tick to qualify for cyber insurance, it's like becoming insane, for what they want you to have in order to qualify for the insurance. And my opinion is that invest it in your organization, man. Invest it in your people. Like I get it, it's a nice safety net, but it's not a guarantee either, right? And if you're an
Mm.
organization like many that have, limited resources, limited budgets, really put it in your people, put it in your organization, and really try and risk manage that way.
Yeah.
Because just because you have cyber insurance, it doesn't mean you're not going to get attacked. It just means you might have a few extra options, when it
Yeah.
happens, right? It's not a silver bullet.
I mean, yeah, totally, and I think I'm kind of in agreement there. I'm not like fully against it, as
Me
in,
neither. Yeah.
like, yeah, I think you're exactly the same. But it does seem it is an interesting area to kind of come down because it's also like, how can you insure against an attack because the costs can be so ongoing and abstract. Like, okay, you don't have access to your files for 4 days. It's costing you this amount of money. All right, that's kind of somewhat quantifiable. But then, what about reputational loss? What about the loss of the customers or the renewals, or or the lawsuits that are going to come from people? Is that going to be covered? Like all of these questions that it's kind of I'm not even sure what it covers. We should get an insurance person on here, but I totally get
Yeah.
what you're saying is that the money is spent on that. The best part about it that I see is that it would probably force a lot of organizations to kind of go ahead and at least tick the boxes on something so that they can actually qualify for it. So
That's a
yeah,
good point. Yeah, no, fair enough. And again, like, and it kind of just goes back to what we were talking about before for business impacts too, right? It's different for every organization, and it becomes a matter of risk management. What's important to you? Sometimes some organizations, cyber insurance might make sense for them, right? Like, so again, it's not to knock cyber insurance, but I just don't think that it's that silver bullet that people think that it is. Because I mean, even look at regular insurance too, right? You know, there's acts of God, and things like that, where insurance companies like, well, yeah, sorry, we can't. You're not covered, unfortunately. And again, I understand why, you know, there's certain clauses and things like that there as well, but it does make the waters very difficult to navigate. And like you said, truly knowing what you're covered for.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And and like you said, you talked about reputational damage and stuff as well, right? I mean, you can't put a price tag on that. So that's great. You might be able to financially recover in the short term, but if your reputation shot, what does that mean for the long term? One of my favorite expressions, you know, is brought up by a lot of KPMG executives actually over the years, is that, you know, it takes years sometimes to build trust, and it's a second to just sell it down the river. And that should not be lost on anybody.
So
Yeah, I think.
I really appreciate the way you say there is like take that same money and invest it back in your org. Um, but I'm kind of wondering what that looks like, and I think the answer to that was really the talk you gave back in Halifax, which is getting back to basics. So for people listening who are like, I am on that fence and I have a bunch of money, and I thought maybe if I go down this compliance route and could check a bunch of boxes, but you're saying there's another way I can invest this money internally. Where would you even start? What does that even look like?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I would say it probably depends on where the organization is on their journey and stuff. But like I've always been a huge proponent of awareness and training. I think that it's something that doesn't get enough attention generally, because again, it's finding the strength in your people. And you know, the old adage, "You're only as strong as your weakest link." I'm sure there's a bunch of other analogies there as well. But you can invest infinite amount of dollars into, you know, the most complex, you know, SIMs, intrusion detection, all this kind of stuff. But if you have one person that just has poor security awareness, clicks on something that they shouldn't, inserts a USB into something when they shouldn't, it's all over. It doesn't matter. So, you know, awareness and training to me is a very big pillar that I think gets often overlooked. I think, you know, a lot of organizations have their, you know, code of conduct or their initial kind of security awareness training, and that's it. Check box, done. But training should be a continuous thing. Whether it's exercising, whether it's things like phishing campaigns, all of that kind of stuff. That's actually one thing that you know, I'm working on with some colleagues right now, is to do more immersive security awareness, where, you know, you don't just do a phishing campaign and then you're like, okay, well, here's the issues, here's some recommendations, and you walk away. You actually bring the group into a room and say, okay, what happened? Let's walk through kind of how this kind of situation unfolded, and really empower the people to recognize that they have a role to play and that they're the same as everybody else. We all should be cybersecurity. We should all have cybersecurity kind of at the core of everything that we do.
Yeah.
We completely agree with you on the awareness side. That's part of the reason we have the podcast, is to expose
Yeah.
as wide as always possible to as many security topics as we find interesting, as
Yeah.
we're learning this stuff, and everybody's learning together out here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with what you're saying too about, you know, the weakest links. There's a reason why this is this is, you know, that this analogy is used so much. But when you look at security attacks, even the ones that are extremely sophisticated in how they move laterally or activate, go back to the really core of it. Someone clicked on a link. someone opened an email. Like that's not all of it. There's a lot of steps you have to do, but a lot of the time, and I'm not saying always, but a lot of the time, it is that initial step that someone did something, and not
Absolutely.
because
It's that initial foot in the door, right? Yeah.
yeah, and not because they're idiots, but just because they probably lack understanding. And do you know what? It's hard. It's getting harder and harder to find these.
Yeah.
Uh,
That was
Andrew,
something.
oh,
Oh, sorry,
no,
sorry.
no,
One
go for it,
last
Dwayne.
point there. With that thought, something I saw at or heard at a conference recently was we've gotten in security to the point where we're like, it's very easy to just blame the user. So like, yeah, Bob in accounting clicked the wrong link and took down the system. But if you're also saying, hey, I'm in security and my job was to make sure that Bob didn't click the link, but I didn't address the fact that one person clicking one link could take down an entire system.
Yeah,
Did I
yeah.
really accomplish security? Like,
It's
and
true.
that's the question I think CISOs, that's the presenter at the time was thinking, like, that goes back to the availability question. It's like, maybe the CISO's job is the availability question. Maybe it put so many places, checks in place that even if half the department clicks the wrong link, it can't bring the system down. But
Yeah.
that's a whole other
Yeah,
avenue of discussion.
but honestly, just like a little bit of an OT nexus there as well. Like that's why I love OT security. That IAEA document that I helped work on over the years, just about establishing your levels and zones, right? Because it all becomes risk management, and it's all about kind of developing that defensive architecture where you're not going to lead to a single point of failure. Like you said, one click brings the system down. There should be, redundant defense in depth measures to ensure that that doesn't happen. So again, yeah, for sure, it's a mutual responsibility, 100%.
Yeah, for sure. Look, we could keep going for ages, but we do have to rein it in a little bit, and it's been a fascinating conversation so far. We do have one little game that we like to play with everyone called Best and
Sure.
Worst. It's where we
Okay.
ask you what is the best security advice that you would give, or perhaps someone has given to you, and then we're going to follow it up with what is the worst security advice you've ever heard, or that is out there in the ethos. Let's start with the best. What is the best security advice that you would give someone, or someone has given to you?
Well, I can do both actually. There's one thing that it's stuck in my head for probably the last 10 years. It was a nuclear cybersecurity conference over in Austria. And it was, big talk about just security culture and everything about that. And the guy just had a definition of security culture, and it says, do the right thing even when no one's watching. That's what a good security culture is. And that's just something that sticks with me. But in terms of advice I would give to other people as well is, we talked about it before. Don't try and do it all yourself. It's a journey. It's not a race. And really it's about surrounding yourself with good people. It's a collaborative effort, and you should be sharing each other's successes in that regard.
Yeah.
Journey, not a race. I've not heard anybody say that actually out loud. I see journey, not a destination. A
Yeah.
lot, but that actually makes. I like that. I'm gonna steal that or
All
borrow
right.
that up moving forward.
Don't worry. The copyright's cheap, man. Don't worry.
Well,
The worst
And
advice.
then, sorry. And then maybe to
Yep.
go into the worst advice. Yeah. So I'm not really sure if it's advice per se. I mean, actually, a funny one I could just say is, buy cyber insurance, and that'll solve all your problems. But
love it, love it.
yeah, but one of the worst mindsets I've seen are ones of defeat, where people are like, well, once they're in, they're in. So like, what can we really do? Which is just a terrible attitude to have, or just honestly straight up ignorance. I got to be careful here not to provide any traceability back to a conversation I had with somebody, but I remember somebody at one point in my career when I brought up something that I thought was a pretty significant issue about, protecting, certain types of information and stuff like that. I was told, well, like, that's really an IT kind of focus, an IT job. We should really just be focusing on being the best X in the world. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Again, we just talked about it for the last little bit here. Security is everybody's responsibility. And you should be listening to everybody, because that's usually where the best ideas come from. I think it was, whatchamacallit there, World War II, after Pearl Harbor. I think it was like a submarine commander came up with the tactics to do the air assault in Japan. You always just get great advice and great alternative views from people that aren't fully immersed in cyber. And I think that's a very untapped well that should be considered.
Yeah. Very interesting. Well, I really loved your responses there. We have come to the end of the show here, and I just want to give an opportunity for you. If any of the listeners want to follow your journey or follow you on social media, what's the best place for them to be able to do that? And I'll provide links in the show notes for anyone that's listening.
Yeah, so probably the best way to to stay in touch is probably through LinkedIn. So I think Dwayne has my link for sure, but I can provide that after as well. Pretty active in that community, and like I said, like I know I got senior manager cybersecurity in my job title there, but people want to talk about nuclear. I love talking about nuclear. Really, I love people. I just love having great conversations. So anybody that's listening, if you want to get in touch, please reach out. For sure, more than happy to chat with you.
Yeah, great. And we'll provide links into that. I have loved this conversation because, you know what, the whole reason why we started the podcast was just to kind of have interesting conversations with people. And this has been a fascinating conversation. Dwayne, any final words before we click the big red button?
I just want to say thanks again for jumping on here and encouraging people to get back to basics. Can't say enough good things about that. So thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot for having me. This is fantastic. And more than happy to come back anytime. If you guys want to actually have a full-on nuclear session, let me know.
Yeah, let's do it for sure.
Awesome.